The silence before Fire Commander Trell of the Verkal Empire stood still on the bridge of the dread carrier Omen Claw, eyes locked on the glowing blue orb floating at the center of the war room. It pulsed slowly, showing a rotating 3D scan of the enemy vessel, the first human warship ever encountered in the galactic field. He had expected chaos, disorder, maybe rust and desperation. That was how humans were spoken of across the stars, as wild, unpredictable, barely evolved creatures with too much emotion and too little discipline. But what he saw made his ridged brow tighten. "This is not possible," said one of his tacticians. Her voice trembled. The human vessel, marked HSS Valor Bound, had no shields raised, no weapons primed, and yet the scans wouldn't go deeper. As if something inside the ship rejected the scan, bent it, erased it, not jammed, something deeper, older. An encryption that wasn't code. It was as if the ship itself refused to be known. Trell leaned closer to the image. "Run it again." His officer swallowed. That was the 10th time. Same result. The scan stops at the hull. Our systems start to glitch. Sensors lose integrity. Something inside that ship makes our machines feel fear, Trell hissed. Machines couldn't feel fear. And yet, the lights flickered. The ship's hull groaned softly as though it too didn't want to get closer. Across the dark space between them, the human ship floated without motion, without threat. No lights flashed. No energy spiked. And yet, every warrior on board the Omen Claw felt it, an ache in the chest, a crawling in the mind, like something ancient was watching them, waiting. On board the Valor Bound, Lieutenant Ayla Mora sat alone in her small observation room near the forward array. She stared at the stars through a wide glass panel, her fingers lightly tapping her. She wore no armor, just a faded navy jumpsuit. On the floor beside her, a cracked photo rested, 2 smiling faces. One human, one not. She closed her eyes. "They're going to scan us again," she whispered. "They always do." They still don't understand. The room around her shivered faintly, not from fear, not from pressure, but from something else, something. Locked in the ship's heart, a presence. It pulsed once more. Not loud, not angry, but aware. It was like standing beside an ocean that breathed, thinking it was still water, only to realize the tide had been watching you all along. In the command center, Captain Rahim stood behind the helm, eyes on the silent dread carrier approaching. He didn't issue orders. He didn't blink. He simply waited, because he knew what was inside the ship. He knew what had bonded to the core of the Valor Bound years ago during that failed deep space mission to the edge of known space. They had called it an anomaly, an energy entity, a ghost. But it was more than that. It had chosen them. And now, every time a species tried to scan the Valor Bound, it would feel it. Not through technology, but through instinct. An echo of something long buried in every intelligent race. An ancient warning from the old stars. Do not open this door. Trail finally spoke again. Slowly, carefully. Pull us back. His second in command turned sharply. What? They are vulnerable, unarmed. We have the numbers. Pull us back. His voice cracked under pressure. We are not fighting humans. We are standing at the edge of something far older. And it wears their skin. No one on the bridge moved. They felt it too. In their bones and their teeth. A quiet howl in the dark, beneath all frequencies, and on the Valor Bound, Ayla opened her eyes and whispered to the stars, "Not yet." The voice in the Hulth Omen Claw drifted backward in silence, its engines barely pulsing. No commands echoed through its massive decks. No strategy discussions hummed from its officers. Instead, silence blanketed the warship like cold ash. Commander, Trawl sat in his private quarters, eyes locked on the single data panel that still glitched. It showed the human ship. No change, same soft glow, same unreadable core. He clenched his jaw. Not out of fear, at least, that's what he told himself, but out of something worse. Confusion. Aliens feared what they did not understand. And the Valorbound was wrapped in that very thing. Deep inside the Verkal archives, ancient texts spoke of the Gateborn. Beings that didn't build ships, they merged with them. Not through bolts and steel, but through intent. They moved through space like silent judges. They never spoke, they never answered, and they never attacked, unless they were touched. Trail had never believed those stories. Until today. Meanwhile, inside the Valorbound, Ayla walked the dimly lit hallway leading toward the core chamber. Her footsteps were slow, cautious. She wasn't alone. She never was. The air in the corridor was too still, too perfect. And behind every corner, there was that presence. It didn't hide. It simply was. Like the ship had a soul, she passed and souls. Open panel on the wall. Tiny sparks flickered gently, like stars in a box. Then she heard it again. A low whisper in her mind. Not in a voice, not in a language, but in feeling. They fear what you protect. She stopped, hand brushing the cool steel. Wall, you're awake again, she whispered. The whisper returned gentler this time. They should fear. You should fear. You carry it. Yla took a shaky breath. We didn't ask for you. You chose us. And I stayed. Captain Rahim stood in the war room above, watching the enemy ship pull back. The crew watched him for guidance. But he gave none. He didn't need to. There was only one rule aboard the Valorbound when the presence stirred: stay still. Stay respectful. Do not provoke it. The scans would trigger its awareness. Aggressive actions would stir it. But reverence was tolerated. Then, a soft beat broke the stillness. A message flickered on screen. Incoming transmission from the Verkal dread carrier. Every on the deck turned. They hadn't expected this. Not after silence. Not after retreat. Rahim nodded once. Open it. The face of Commander Troll filled the display, his eyes tense, shoulders stiff. Human Captain, Troll said slowly. We request a dialogue. Peaceful, respectful. We will not approach. We will not scan. We ask only one thing. Rahim raised an eyebrow. And what is that? Troll swallowed. What is inside your ship? Rahim paused. The crew held their breath. Then he spoke, not with pride or threat, but with something ancient in his voice. We don't know what it is. Only that it answered when we cried out. It found us broken, dying. It saved us. And it never asked for anything in return. Then why? Trell asked. Does it feel like it's warning us? Rahim looked down. Because it is. Ayla entered the core chamber. It was almost silent. No machines hummed, no lights blinked. Only a dark sphere floated gently above the floor, pulsing once every few seconds like a slow heartbeat. She stepped closer, her eyes full of memory. They want to understand you, she said, but they're not ready. The sphere pulsed again. No one is. And across the cold distance of space, the Verkal fleet didn't turn to fire. They turned to listen. Whispers between Starsela stood alone in the core chamber, her eyes fixed on the black sphere floating above the circular base. It had no markings, no texture, just a strange depth, like a hole cut into reality itself. When it pulsed, the light around it bent slightly. Like it wasn't just glowing, it was breathing. She spoke softly, knowing it heard. You let them send the message. Why? The sphere pulsed again. To see if they still remember how to speak. Outside the Valorbound, space shimmered faintly. The Omen claw still hovered at a respectful distance, but more ships had arrived. They weren't in attack formation. They were forming a perimeter. Watching, Raheem paced the command deck, calm but alert. The air was heavy with quiet tension. He'd seen this before, when predators circled uncertain prey. When nature itself paused, unsure if it was looking at a threat or a god. His second officer turned to him. "Captain, we're being observed from 5 different species." The Verkal invited them. "They want to confirm what they felt during the scan." Raheem nodded. "Let them look. But if anyone scans again, we'll know." The officer finished. Down in the crew quarters, Technician Ramirez sat on his bunk, clutching the small journal he always kept. His fingers trembled, but not from fear, from memory. The last time he heard the presence whisper, it had shown him an image. Not of destruction, but of home, his childhood street, his mother's garden, his dog that had died 10 years before. The memory had been perfect. "It knows us," he had whispered to Ayla afterward. "It doesn't just read our minds, it feels them." But not all crew members felt comfort. Private Silva had stopped speaking entirely since the presence had awoken again. She barely ate. She stared out the viewport like she was watching for something invisible. "What's wrong?" Ayla had asked her once. Silva hadn't answered at first. Then, with trembling lips, she had said, "It showed me my death. And I wasn't scared. That's what terrified me." Ayla remembered that now as she stood before the sphere. "They're not ready," she whispered again. "You'll break them." The sphere responded, "Not if they kneel first. Not to me." To what they forgot. The bridge lights flickered on the Omen Claw. Troll stood in silence as a new transmission played across his screen, but it didn't come from the humans. No words, no voice. Only images. His eyes widened. The first image was of a dead star, a place thought to be myth. Then came a symbol, one no species had used in eons, the mark of the gate builders. They were the first. The ones who mapped the stars before language, who shaped the void with thought. Every species had stories of them. None had seen them. Until now. Trell's voice was barely audible. "The presence on that ship, it's not human. It's old tech, awakened." His aide whispered, "Why would it be helping them?" Trell turned toward the viewport. "Because humans didn't ask to control it. They cried for help. And something heard them." Back on the Valorbound, Ayla's fingers touched the cold edge of the chamber platform. "You're not a weapon," she said. "The sphere pulsed again. No, but I remember how to end wars. Outside, the other fleets began to reposition, slowly drifting farther back, not from order, not from fear, but from instinct. They knew now. This wasn't a standoff. It was a warning wrapped in silence. And still, no shot had been fired. The memory of fire deep inside the Valorbound. The lights dimmed for exactly 3 seconds. No alarm sounded. No voices rose. But every crew member felt it. A pulse in the back of their skulls. A tightening in their chests. Like something massive had shifted just beneath the surface of space. Not a movement, but an awareness. Ayla froze mid-step as she left the core chamber. The silence around her felt heavier now. Not hostile, but purposeful. Like the ship itself was bracing for something old. Something it had survived once before. The presence whispered softly in her mind. They reached the memory. On the Omen Claw, Trell stood frozen before the glowing console. The image they had received had changed. It now displayed not just the mark of the gate builders, but a memory sequence embedded in ancient cosmic code, one the Verkal could barely decrypt. But what they saw chilled them to their cores. It was a battlefield. Not in space, but between stars. Planets cracked open like shells. Fleets turned to dust mid-flight. No screams, only silence. Something moved through the chaos, unseen, unshaped, but its shadow erased light, and at the heart of it all, a vessel not human not known, but unmistakably shaped like the valor-bound Trella's voice cracked. This isn't the first time it has awakened. His aide whispered, "It wiped entire empires." "No," Trell replied, trembling. "They wiped themselves trying to own it." On board the valor-bound, Captain Rahim watched the approaching vessel shift. No one had fired, but every fleet now faced the human ship like pilgrims before a shrine. His voice was quiet. "They've seen it now," his comms officer nodded. "They're broadcasting the memory across the galactic net. Other races are watching too." "Good," Rahim said. "Maybe now they'll listen." Ayla arrived on the bridge. Her face was pale but steady. "It's showing them its past." Rahim nodded without turning. "It's showing them why it chose us." Ayla lowered her voice. "We were dying when it came. Barely breathing. The ship was cold. We thought it was the end. And instead," Rahim said, "it gave us a second life." On the lower decks, Technician Ramirez whispered to no one. "We were the only ones who didn't try to control it." Ayla added, "We asked it to let us die in peace, and instead, it stood." Out in space, a new signal appeared, not from the Verkal, not from the humans, but from a hidden fleet cloaked just beyond the dead star's gravitational edge. Forgotten Empire. The Rukari, they had not spoken to any race in 500 years. But now their signal came through. The memory is incomplete. We were there. We remember the voice. And we know its name. Rahim's eyes narrowed. They gave it a name? Ayla stepped forward. They survived it? The Rukari message continued. You call it a presence, a guardian. But it is not here to protect. It is here to finish what was left undone. On the bridge, every console flickered. In the core chamber, the black sphere pulsed hard enough to rattle the walls. I whispered, "What did they leave undone?" The presence responded. Truth. In a single heartbeat, dozens of ships across nearby sectors began to experience the same pulse. Their scans broke. Their systems stuttered. Something ancient was stirring, not across space, but within it. The galactic net went silent. No one knew how to respond. And inside the Valorbound, the crew finally understood this wasn't a weapon. This was a witness, and it was ready to speak. The witness awakened. Silence across the galactic net stretched longer than anyone expected. For the first time in generations, the stars themselves seemed to hold their breath. Fleets floated still. Weapons remained locked. All eyes turned toward the human ship, not with hatred or fear now, but with dreaded curiosity. On board the Valorbound, the black sphere in the core chamber began to change. Its smooth, flawless surface cracked slightly at the center, not with damage, but with intention. Light leaked from the fracture. Soft, golden, and alive. Ayla stood just outside the threshold, unable to move. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from knowing that whatever came next could not be undone. It is time, the presence said in her mind. Time for what? She whispered. To remember. Together. The crew across the ship froze as their displays dimmed and lit again. Not with data, but with visions. Not dreams, memories, but not theirs. The ship was showing them what it had seen. Rahim gripped the command railing as the bridge lights flickered. He saw flashes, a council of ancient beings older than stars arguing in languages without sound. War plans carved into moons. A single star system sealed off by the will of 1,000 races. And then came the silence, a darkness no weapon could pierce. It spread like oil across galaxies, not evil, not alive, but hungry, curious. And when it found them, it didn't speak. It remembered them. Back then, the ancient builders tried to contain it, not destroy it, They couldn't. Instead, they crafted vessels to carry the memory. Vessels that could drift in space, silent and unreachable. Warnings. Markers. The Valorbound was never just a ship. It was a burial chamber for truth. A YLA stumbled back from the core room as images poured into her mind. A dying crew from decades ago whispering their last goodbyes, wrapping their thoughts in code, sending them into the sphere like prayers, and something had answered. Not because it wanted to save, but because it wanted to remember what kindness felt like. Down in the lower decks, Ramirez fell to his knees. He saw himself as a child again. But this time, he wasn't alone. The presence stood behind him, not as a shadow or God, but as a mirror. It showed him who he had become, and who he still could be. On the Omenclaw, Trell received a new message, not through comms, but directly through the ship's interface. It had no sender, no encryption. Only one line. What will you leave behind when the stars forget your name? The Rukari fleet responded first. They opened their archives, shared forbidden knowledge, unsealed ancient warnings. The council of their elders, long silent, began to broadcast again. It is real, said their eldest speaker. The witness has returned, not to judge, but to remind. Remind them all what? That power fades. That empires fall. But the echo of one true act of compassion could awaken something no army ever could. Rahim watched the core from the bridge's upper window as the sphere slowly lifted into the air. It was no longer just energy. It had a voice now. And for the first time, that voice spoke aloud, not in one language, but in all of them. A whisper that rang across every fleet, every homeworld, every waiting child staring into the stars. Stars do not remember your wars. They remember who you protected. Ayla fell to her knees, tears in her eyes. This wasn't a message for the aliens. It was a message for them. For humanity. Because out of every race, they were the only ones who never asked the witness to kill. They only asked it to let them live long enough to love one more time. And that was enough. Echoes carry farther than Ferethi stars did not blink. But across dozens of systems, entire civilizations paused as the message echoed. Not through wires, not through data streams, but through memory itself. On the Valorbound, silence fell again. But this time, it wasn't empty. It was full of grief, of truth, of something older than war. Ayla remained on her knees in the corridor outside the core chamber, her breathing slow and uneven. Her mind still rang with the voice of the witness. It hadn't yelled. It hadn't demanded. But its words had cracked something inside her that she hadn't known was fragile. She whispered, "You saw all their endings, but you chose our beginning." Inside the sphere, the golden light pulsed once, then twice, softer now, less intense, like it had finished remembering and was letting go. "You gave me something they never did," it said. "You gave me purpose." On the bridge, Captain Rahim stood before the wide observation screen. The galaxy felt smaller somehow, not because they were surrounded, but because all the walls had come down. Across the galactic net, fleets had stopped moving. Messages from hundreds of species flooded the channels. Some offered peace. Some offered silence, but none offered war. A transmission appeared on screen, unexpected, unmarked, and impossibly old. Rahim accepted it. An image filled the room, not of any alien, not of a known species, but of Earth. Long ago, before the jump drives, before the wars, before the stars knew humanity's name, a child stood in a burned-out city street, holding a battered book, offering it to a dying stranger. No food, no water, just a story. And the memory burned into time. That act had reached the witness, and it had remembered. Not the war, not the death. The offering. Ramirez wiped his eyes. That's why it chose us. Not because we were strong, not because we were clever, but because when we had nothing, we still gave. In the deep, uncharted parts of the galaxy, systems that had locked themselves away began to open. Long dormant satellites powered up. Ships buried in coal dust drifted toward life. The presence was waking them to not to conquer, to remind. On the Omen Claw, Troll gave his final order. Send word to all fleets. Retreat, not in fear, but in respect. We were wrong. His aide whispered, "What about the humans?" Troll looked down at his trembling hands. They became what we all feared. Not rulers, not warriors, but witnesses. Back on the Valorbound, Ayla stood slowly. The sphere had stopped glowing. Its shape became still, but she knew it was still listening. "What happens now?" she asked. "I sleep until the next voice calls me without anger, without pride, until another spark reminds me that even in the dark, someone will still offer warmth." Yla placed her hand against the chamber wall. "Thank you," she said, "not as a soldier, not as a survivor, but as a human." Outside, the fleets turned away. Some left messages of peace. Others sent music. A few sent stories. And from that day forward, the galaxy changed, not through battle, but through memory. Because the witness didn't teach them fear. It taught them something far harder to carry. Hope. The gift we never asked for. The galaxy never recorded the Valorbound as the most powerful ship. It didn't have the largest weapons or fastest drives. It didn't conquer systems or raise flags over new worlds, but everyone remembered it. They remembered the moment it hovered silently in a field of fleets, untouched and unshaken, while the ancient witness inside it spoke to all of them. Not in commands, not in warnings, in memories, in kindness. In the fragile, impossible language of hope. Weeks had passed since the incident. The Verkal Empire had withdrawn entirely from human sectors. The Rukari, once hidden behind forbidden space, had signed a new alliance, not of weapons, but of archives and education. In Earth, it had become the center of a question no one could answer. Why them? Why had something that ancient, that terrifying, chosen humanity? The truth was simpler than anyone expected. On the bridge of the Valorbound, Captain Rahim looked over the latest reports. Humanitarian ships were being sent to border colonies. Alien envoys had arrived not to make demands, but to learn how humans taught kindness in chaos. Even the smallest planets were suddenly visited by scholars and seekers. Yla stood at the viewport, staring at the stars. "We didn't earn this," she said quietly. "We were just desperate. We were ready to die." Rahim stepped beside her. "That's exactly why it chose us." Ayla looked at him. "We didn't reach out with weapons," he continued. "We reached out with sorrow, with honesty, with the only thing we had left, the wish to live just long enough to say goodbye to the people we loved." Ayla smiled faintly. "And instead, it gave us a future." Below deck, Ramirez sat with a group of rookies, new recruits from across the Allied races. He held a small wooden box in his lap. He opened it, revealing the same old photo Ayla once carried, a human child and an alien boy laughing in a field of junk ships. "This," he said softly, "is why it hurt us. Not because of power, not because of fear, but because we remember each other, even when the world falls apart." Some of the recruits had tears in their eyes. Back in the core chamber, the black sphere remained still, dim, silent, resting, but it was never empty. Sometimes, when a crew member stood nearby with a heavy heart, it would pulse once, gently, as if listening, as if remembering with them. And the galaxy, once ruled by fear and pride, now held meetings where stories were told instead of strategies. where races shared memories instead of maps, where songs replaced declarations of war. One small act, one ship crying out in the void, not for conquest but for comfort, had awakened something every species had buried deep, the understanding that survival meant more than winning. It meant remembering why you chose to live at all. And the humans? They never claimed to understand the witness. They never tried to control it. They only built a quiet space around it, a place where anyone from any star could come and be heard. On a quiet night, far from any star, a lone explorer once asked the ship's guide, "What's inside the Valor Bound?" The guide smiled. "Memories," he said, "and one very old soul who still believes we're worth saving."